Alright, I think a response video to the Modern Mystic, probably on the economics channel if I still have long videos. If I don't, I will put it on the website and such. But yeah, so I'm starting a little bit into it just because we don't need the introductory
It
drivel.
is the fact that, because this is not directly from the comment, it's just general comments I've been reading over the last couple of weeks, that we'll just have a mass default on all this money stuff because, after all, that'll only hurt the rich people. And I go,
Yeah, well, see, this is the silly part. So his contention is that somehow there isn't a grotesque misdistribution of ownership, and in turn, capital and interest payments and all that kind of stuff. Like, I would argue the huge problem here is that this tiny percentage of people own all of this wealth. They collect a huge income off of that wealth, an income that dwarfs what working people are getting paid, and therefore the economy is doomed to failure because you're paying the rich more than you're paying the workers. And that his argument is apparently that he thinks if you divvy up all the IOUs that are out there, all the pieces of paper that say I'm entitled to something, I own something, that somehow if you divvy them all up, there's just as many poor people holding them as rich people, or some sort of equation that makes it some sort of parity, that somehow it's going to hurt the poor as much as the rich if you just say screw the IOUs. Okay, game over. We broke the system has to die, the end. And no, the fact is the workers are still competent workers. The workers are living efficient lives compared to the wealthy. The wealthy are definitely going to get killed if we just say screw the IOUs. I mean, then that's all we really have to do to fix this problem. There's too many claims on too few resources. And I might as well explain it again. Look, you have cash, okay? The government prints this thing called cash. And it was always kind of backed up because the government owns some assets like Yellowstone Park and, stuff on the moon and whatever. And so in circulation now there's like 5 trillion. A few years ago there was 3 trillion. And that was it. That's all the cash there was. But then you have all this other stuff that isn't cash, but it's equivalent to cash. And you can own it. So it can be a house deed, or it can be a stock certificate, or it can be a bond. Now those things, they all have different weights as cash. But I mean, government bonds are essentially cash. Okay, they are. Except you can change the price of them a little. And stocks, well, they aren't cash, but they're the equivalent. They can be traded for cash. They are denominated in a cash value. And but they're just a piece of paper. They don't have anything to do with the government. Doesn't have anything to do with the government printing them. These are just things capitalists invented to say this is a good contract. We assure you, it's a good contract. Maybe it's a derivative. Maybe it's a big pile of crap. But we say it's a good contract, and we say it's worth this, and that's what they establish through their stock market and their other little games they play. And this is how they generate more ownership of more IOUs, more statements saying they're entitled to some sort of cash equivalent. So anyway, so these things are out there in the world, and these things have cash value. So when you think of cash, you have to think about these other instruments. And all these other instruments, these deeds, these stock certificates, and these bonds, are not held by people, they're held by the rich. And the few regular people that have some investment, like unions, there's a few unions that are invested in the stock market. Well, technically, they should go broke. They should lose their money because they're investing in the very instrument of their oppression. They're investing in the very capitalist industry that wishes to destroy their wage base. So, in a sense, they really should lose their damn money.
I don't think you quite understand.
Okay. I don't think you do.
And the thing that I think is part of this idea comes from a misunderstanding about banks and the money that they're lending. Okay. I think most people think that people get richer and richer. Yeah, I've got to make up how I think people might be thinking because it's, to my mind, a bit odd. But I can understand how...
Yeah, he thinks it's odd to call somebody rich when they acquire a whole bunch of these certificates, these bonds and stocks and deeds, and claim ownership of your life. And own, like, say, the national debt. Say I owned a bunch of bonds. United States bonds, that would mean you have to pay me the money. You owe it to me, okay, because you're an American citizen. Let's say if you're an American citizen. And the average citizen, the average worker in America, owes a couple of $100,000 to these people who hold these bonds. These bonds aren't being held by you, the people. So he's going to try to sell you this idea that somehow all these exchanges that have gone on is some kind of equity. Like I gave you $20 and you gave me $30 over here, and then I gave you another 40 over there, and you gave me 20 over there, and then somehow if we work this all out, we only owe each other money, and it's not some other entity, some 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% of the population who really owns all the IOUs. That's the the fraud he's selling here.
You might think this way. People, tycoons, get richer and richer and deposit their money in a bank. Then the bank has lots of money to lend out to people like you and me for mortgages. So, if...
Well, look, that's not even how... We know that mortgages aren't lent out based on that kind of arrangement. The mortgages are lent out because the bank takes ownership of the property. So the bank owns the deed to the house, which has the value of the loan. So that's almost an equitable trade right there. Plus, it has the down payment that will end up somehow or other in their bank one way or the other, because the person getting paid the down payment is likely to deposit it in a bank or put it into some market instrument that will make the bank richer indirectly. Plus, they have the agreement that the guy is going to pay them back all this interest plus the value of the house. So they don't need, that's a collateralized loan. So there's no point in talking about lending money for collateralized loans. Talk about the lending that takes place for uncollateralized loans and loans made on stock value. I mean, some guy goes to the bank and says, here, look, I have $500 million in IBM stock, but I don't want to cash it out. I just want the equity so I can buy some other stock with it. I mean, that kind of game is being played by the banks.
We don't pay our mortgages, the bank can't pay the rich tycoon back. Or something like that is only what I can imagine people are thinking just by the comments that I've been reading. Okay, but I just wanted to say that that is nonsense. Besides the fact that rich tycoons don't keep their money in banks, banks don't need money to lend money.
Yeah, well, they do, though, keep their money in banks. It's part of how the banks do their banking is, the transaction trails that go on. Obviously, the end result, the money ends up in a market because nobody's just going to keep money in a vault, okay? The banks aren't stupid. They don't put assets in a vault somewhere and say, let's just leave the vault let's leave the stuff sitting in a vault so it makes no money. So obviously there's no interest in keeping stuff in a vault somewhere. So obviously it has to go out into the world. But they make money on all those transactions. So technically the money is in a bank register somewhere. Maybe it's not in the bank. Maybe the rich don't have deposits directly in the bank, but they are indirectly in the bank.
What happens in banking across the world is that they note what the banking people of the world are doing. Let's say in 2005, for instance, they note that all banks around the world, basically en masse, are lending money. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to jump ahead. I mean, this is a little bit convoluted, but his argument is they're all just doing this lending thing, and he makes the argument that is valid in a sense, that it doesn't have anything to do with the money they have in the bank. It just has to do with the loans they make and whether those loans create a profit or they don't create a profit. But yeah, really, these reserve requirements and the rest of it don't really matter. But they do matter to some extent. I mean, my bank is really horny to get me to establish a savings account versus a checking account, because then they can put the savings account in their reserve column and use it as a deposit to multiply times 10 in terms of loans. So they can cover loans they've made based on my deposit at a 10-to-1 ratio.
But if you want to take it out of the world and keep it a bit more local, in your sit out,
Here we go.
right? This is fresh air money. It comes from absolutely nowhere. It's got nothing to do with the deposits that they've got.
Again, so see, he's again making this implication that banks just create money, okay, and that there's this whole bunch of money, cash, in the economy that banks created. That's not true, okay? There's a certain limited number of cash, okay? Banks are used to inject more cash into the economy, and they do that through loans. But it's all on books somewhere, and it's all a record of it is kept. And so there's only 5 trillion of this cash out there. They've only like taken in a house and given somebody a loan and given them $300,000 to buy a house from somebody. They've done that to only $5 trillion worth. There's no more out there of this cash stuff. The rest of the economy is in the form of this borrowed government debt money, the bonds, the stock market, and the deeds to all this property.
In there at all. It's fresh air money. It just comes into the world. Again, like the government thing.
Yeah, well, see, it comes into the world as cash, and it is converted into a stock certificate, or it comes in like a bond is another way of basically printing cash. I mean, a bond is as good as cash. I mean, in a way. I mean, it's backed up by the U.S. government, all that crap, tax breaks and all that come with it. But it was a bad promise. It was a stupid promise. And anybody who lent money to a bad country, a country that has no intention of paying its debt, yeah, well, a fool and his money, are soon parted. I mean, if you bought government bonds in the last 10 years and didn't see the writing on the wall that the U.S. government has never paid back its debts, then yeah, too bad, sucker.
Goes into the borrower's account, and there it is. There's the money, brand new, fresh money. And they buy a house. So the money goes from Bank 1 to Bank 837. But Bank 837 are doing a very similar thing, and that money goes from Bank 837 to Bank 1. In other words, as long as they're all doing it, they lend this brand new.
Again, see, he keeps calling it like it's just invented assets, and it's not. It's assets collateralized by a deed to a house or some other thing, and then the money gets injected into the economy because the deed went into the bank. I mean, it really isn't what he's describing here. The proof is the stock market, okay, where you take government assets like, say, the Social Security Trust Fund, which workers were paying in advance. So workers were taxed in advance to pay into this trust fund, $2 trillion worth. And what happened to that money? Well, that money didn't go into some fund for those workers. It didn't go into some bank account, okay, for those workers. What it did is it went right into the pockets of the richest people in the world who invested it in the stock market. So now the stock market goes up in value. Everybody claims they're richer, and now they're entitled to even more interest because now they claim to be richer because the stock market went up. Well, how did it go up? What asset did it say it went up on? Oh, it went up on the money you took from workers, and you have to pay back to them in the future in terms of benefits of Social Security and health care. Now, is there any intention of those rich people to ever give those poor people, those working people, their health care and their pensions? That's the question. I don't think there's any intention for them to ever pay that money back or to ever make right that benefit that was paid for in advance by those workers.
Fresh air money into the world, collateralized or not, and they know that money is then out there.
Oh yeah, collateralized or not. I mean, these are important terms, Nick. I mean, you can't just say collateralized or not. There's a big difference between collateralized and uncollateralized. And there's a big difference between collateralized based on an honest value of assets and a complete bubble value of assets that's just completely artificial because banks keep lending money on non-real assets. Somebody comes in with a pile of stock and says, yeah, give me some money. I'll give you some stock, you give me some money. That's a mistake. That's an unsecured loan.
The city, and it will come back into one of the 837 banks. In other words, you do the loan first and guaranteed that the deposits will come afterwards. As long as all the banks are lending, the money goes into the city and is deposited in the banks.
But again, what is happening as this is cycling through is that this rich people keep gleaning a interest profit off of the game. So something has to be devalued to pay them that interest. And now they're going to start printing cash, which they did last year and which they're going to do again this year. So they're going to devalue your cash. They're going to try to keep the value of the bonds high. They're going to try to keep the value of the stock high. They're going to try to keep the value of the deeds high. And what are they going to kill? The thing you're paid in when you go to work. You're paid in cash. They're going to destroy your cash. Okay, so they're coming after you right now. And if you don't fight back, okay, they're going to have you destitute before you even know what happened.
Always, 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 loans first, deposits afterwards.
It really doesn't matter. Okay, deed in, money out. Big deal. Okay, same difference. Real asset in, real asset out. What the banks have done is they've taken false assets in and given real assets out. That's why they have a flaw. Okay, they have these bubble deeds, these houses they should have never purchased because they're not worth what what the bubble had created, and they have a ton of this stock crap, these derivatives, bagazillions and bagazillions of these phony derivative crapola paper that isn't worth the ink that's written out of, and you know it. It's worth pennies on a real dollar, and that's the crap that's creating this artificial claims of ownership, these fake IOUs. And these fake IOUs, if you're gonna try to pay them off, you're gonna have to devalue cash by a penny on a dollar.
What money the banks got on deposit is, the banks take no notice of that at all, because they know that if you know about these capital requirements and reserve requirements and all these things, too technical to go into and too technical to even understand. But
Well, look, no, it's not that technical. The point is they have to have some money in the bank in case there's a run on the bank. So yeah, they have to have some deposits that are actually in the bank, some minimum amount of assets. But obviously, like again, I said, there would be no banking if banks didn't lend every single asset they had on hand. If they don't lend the assets, then they can't make any money to pay interest to the people who deposit.
their equivalent of office number one or building number one do keep a tabs on that sort of thing, and if it doesn't add up, then they'll do some short-term borrowing to make it add up. But the crucial thing is to understand it's always, always, always loans first, based on absolutely nothing, and it's completely new, fresh air money. It's not tycoons' money. It's not rich people's money. It's brand new money.
Well, see, this is just a distortion of the truth. It is not new money. In 100 years, we've printed there's 5 trillion US dollars in the economy. That's all. What they have created is bonds, and what they've created is stock certificates. And those are the things that are creating this huge burden, this huge IOU burden, because those things, if they are cashed out, if everybody tries to cash out their assets for something real, okay, there's obviously not enough cash to cash out the stock market and the bond market. If there's $5 trillion in circulation and we have $15 trillion of US bonds out there that need to be paid back, you can do the math. I mean, you can't make 5 cover 15.
From nowhere is lent out into the economy, into the city, and that money is deposited in one of the 837 banks, which goes to make building one happy. So, you default on your loan, you are not necessarily defaulting some sort of rich person. In other words,
Yeah, well, yes, you are necessarily. That's the 99% of the pig is made out of them. All right, so it's just you're just lying to people to imply that if the banks go down, it's the regular Joe that's going to be hurt. He's not. His contract is going to just drift around still. It's going to still go through a bankruptcy court or some other thing. He's still going to have to pay off his house or whatever his debt is, unless it's decided just to liquidate all that. And if they do just liquidate all that, yeah, the only people they're going to lose are the people who are invested in the stock market and who do hold these papers, these bonds that aren't worth anything in realistically worth anything, if unless people are willing to be sentenced to $200,000 worth of slavery sometime in the future, and $200,000 at 40 cents an hour. Okay, so wait till you have to pay off $200,000 at 40 cents an hour. Good luck. That's the world the rich want to put you in.
Those defaults are no easy answer. But forget.
It is the easy answer. Start over. All right? Redistribute the ownership and start anew. It's the only way to fix this mess. All right? And make people work to get paid. Okay? No more of this, I sit on my ass and collect interest. Somebody has to pay for people who don't work. I mean, the idea that people just don't get it. That the bigger welfare pigs are at the high end, the fat end, not the low end. Okay, the guy's eating garbage and getting $500 a month from the VA. That guy isn't a liability. The fucker living in a mansion, squandering hundreds and maybe even millions of dollars a year on bullshit. That's the fucking welfare pig you're paying for. Okay, that free money those the lazy rich are feeding on, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of your fucking pocket. I mean, you gotta understand how everything's diluted in the end. There's so much work accomplished, and all we're deciding is how we're going to divvy up the productivity of that work accomplished. And the way we've decided, apparently, is to give a huge, giant hunk of the pie, 95% of the pie, to 3 or 4% of the human population, and then to get the rest of the human beings to fight over that little crumb that's left over, that little 4% that's left over. And that's the bullshit lie of this fucking capitalist crap that this guy defends. Anyway, enough. Till next time, and such, and so forth, and whatnot.